Ambassador Jean-Daniel Ruch, thank you very much for coming to our conference and giving this very interesting lecture. We would like to ask you a few questions, so related to your lecture, your experience, and also to the ICD, to the work that the ICD does in cultural diplomacy. So there's the first question I would like to ask you was related to the relationship between Switzerland and Libya. You mentioned it during your lecture, but I was wondering whether you could give us any update on that front, especially since the Libyan revolution.
Well, obviously, during the last years of Gaddafi, our relation was extremely bad. Especially because of this row I explained on the fact that as a retaliation for Switzerland having kept his son 2 days in a Swiss jail, Gaddafi kept himself as a hostage to Swiss businessmen during over 2 years. So this created, of course, big strains in our relationship. And eventually we managed to get our hostages back in the summer of 2010, thanks to the support of some European countries. In particular, I must say Italy was very helpful, Germany was very helpful, and also Spain were all very, very helpful in helping in this release. Now the wonderful irony is that 2 years after Gaddafi was threatening Switzerland that it should be dismantled and was asking the UN General Assembly to pass a resolution on the dismantlement of Switzerland, 2 years later, actually it is his own regime who has been totally dismantled. Now our policy has been, as soon as we could, we provided humanitarian assistance. First by opening an office in Benghazi when still during the civil war, and then for the rest of the population once the conflict was over. And now we are trying to help them in building their institutions. We have developed a whole development program there to try to build the institution, good governance, and the rule of law in that country.
To ask, what's your opinion regarding the increase of populism or extreme right-wing power in Europe?
You know, this refers also to one of the speakers has said, multiculturalism or cosmopolitanism have to become sort of evidence in the world of today. But you cannot do that if only a small elite is being convinced that this is the case. The key difficulty here is to bring the population on board. And you cannot just have talks among people who are always in the same circles, who live in cities. You have to think also about those people who have never seen an Arab. I live in a village. I can tell you in my village they voted 66% in favor of the abolition of the minarets. You might say I did a very bad work in trying to convince them. Well, I mean, that's not my job. I'm not a politician. But I can tell you that probably all of them have never spoken to a Muslim person, or have never seen an Arab, or have maybe black people, very few, because we have some, but very few of them. So what I mean is that this kind of multiculturalism, sort of integration of races and beliefs in a modus vivendi which works. That works in many cities in the world, provided that these opportunities to meet each other, to interact with each other do exist. That cannot exist when you have sorts of ghettos, cities with ghettos. And that can hardly exist either when you have whole parts of the population, of the local population, which is not exposed to this internationalism or cosmopolitanism. And it's the task of the politicians, I think, and of the leaders of the countries to make sure that no one in their own population is being left behind intellectually and emotionally.
And how could cultural diplomacy prevent the side effects of these extreme groups regarding equality and human rights?
Well, you know, extremists you will always have. So I think that to deal with violent extremism is not the matter of the culture, it is the matter of the police and the prosecution. But where culture can play a very important role is by trying to help to keep those groups of violent extremists as small as possible. And for that, well, culture, through all its facets, through all its aspects, can be used to provide a more positive or a more real image of another group. Now, if we want to speak about Islam in Europe, I think that exhibitions, for instance, exhibitions on the treasures of Islam can be very useful. Or TV programs, but not at midnight, you know. TV programs on how much the European culture owe to Islam in many, many ways. I mean, I always say that one of the most beautiful buildings that I know in the world is the Alhambra in Granada. I don't know if you have seen that. It is incredible. It is incredible. And when you see what Charles V, he built right in the middle of that compound of the Alhambra, he built something like a remake of a Roman circus. I mean, you see all the difference between the finesse of this very high civilization and the sort of, you know, how rough the Western civilization was, or the European civilization was at the time. So we owe a lot to the Arab, but do people know it? What do we say in school books? What do we say in education? Many things should be done. And finally, a lot depends on the opinion maker at the end of the day, because people read newspapers and watch, and they get their information from some sources. So how can you work on those sources so that what they write and what the images that they show provide a balanced and objective, as objective as possible, vision and perception.
And actually, I'd like to continue on this, basically, the problem of sources of knowledge. I was wondering whether sources of knowledge in, like, let's take the Balkans this time, for example, and maybe switch to the Middle East later in your explanation, but sources of knowledge like media or at the high-level universities, are they impartial enough to provide accurate and unbiased information? Or do you need to work to teach people to work on the sources and to find the background of these sources?
You know, for me, what is very important is how history is being taught at school, because what you learn at school when you are a young kid is sort of accompanying you as the truth, or the reference, which is very difficult to change afterwards. So I think, I'm not sure where they are now in the Balkans. I haven't checked that recently, but I would be surprised if they wouldn't manage to agree on a single history school book, even if you stop in 1945, for the whole of the Balkans. We have been associated in the Middle East with some projects on school books, or on history books, actually, where the idea is not to agree on the narrative of the Israelis and the Palestinians, for instance, but at least to try to agree to disagree. And it's very interesting to ask a group of historians, Israelis and Palestinians, separately to write their vision, their narrative of a specific situation or a specific event, and then to put them around the table and try to discuss. I think maybe that's a way where we can slowly deal with the past, correct some prejudices and some images. But to give you an example, which is related to Switzerland, which is, as we all know, a country which is so peaceful, etc., etc. We had a famous row about 15 years ago, when we were sort of forced to revisit Swiss history. The point is that it was discovered Swiss banks had kept many bank accounts which were never claimed, because the people, who were most of them Jews, had died in camps. And Jewish groups came and claimed the return of that money. And eventually that happened. But by the same token, that forced us to revisit the role of Switzerland during the Second World War. Because what we had all been taught was that thanks to our brilliant army and our great general, plus of course some strategic thinking, but basically it was thanks to the army and a very astute economic plan we we had implemented, that Switzerland managed to stay an island of peace. Of course, the report, which was prepared by those historians, introduced many other dimensions, including trade, economy, the interest of Germany to have an industrial base there also, but the interest also of other places to have Switzerland as a place to meet, to gather intelligence, and so on. So, but that was such a shock that the poor man who wrote this was attacked by all sides, simply because the prejudices, the things we had always understood as being the truth, were contested forcefully, and it's very difficult to accept that what you always believed was true. Finally, you discover, well, it was not quite like that. And actually, your self-image and the image you have of your country, the virtuous image you have of your country, has to be revisited. And you have to come down to earth. That's not an easy process when you have been an angel for so many years.
And coming back to your experience in the Balkan zone, do you think cultural diplomacy has helped in fostering sustainable peace in the zone?
Well, it should, yes, of course. No, but you know, as I said, to start with, the contacts between artists is always the easiest. You know, the artists, they can. And wherever you go in the Balkans, they can still sing songs, the same song from the same artists from before. And now actually there is one project I'm pretty proud of that I supported when I was in Belgrade. Actually, at the beginning, it was part of the campaign against Milosevic. A group of young people from Novi Sad, which is a bit in the north of Serbia, they decided, as part of the election campaign against Milosevic, to make a cultural festival where they would invite rock groups, but also from Croatia, from Macedonia, you know, from the region, where they would have theater plays with discussions with the public. For instance, there was a theater play, I think it was about Macbeth or something like that. And you know, you could really associate Milosevic and his wife with Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. So then there were interesting discussions. So it was sort of contestation, opposition, but through culture. And nowadays, this festival, which is called Exit, has become, I think, the largest open-air event in Europe. Very commercial. It's not so much about peace and culture anymore, but you have people from Hungary, from Croatia, from Macedonia, from Bosnia, and of course from Serbia, who are going there and enjoying together. And I think that's also a very modern way through which culture can help to have interaction between many people.
Has cultural relativity and human rights been a challenge throughout your career?
Cultural activity and human rights.
Relativity of human rights.
The relativity of human rights.
Yeah. In regards to culture.
For me, I'm very strict on that. I think that there are some norms and values who are enshrined in international legal documents or in political commitments, in the OSCE, for instance. And they should be applied full stop, to the letter. There is no culturalism or cultural relativity to human rights. Now, this is the rule. The practice is of course different. But I think it is our role as diplomats, as civil servants, it is the role of the civil society also to watch, to watch and to pressure those governments who are not respecting these norms of behavior by the law, very precisely. Now there is one issue which is of course which will have to be, which is a question mark, really is a question of women. It's a question of women with what we see happening in North Africa. And they, but you know, those people who come to power now, those representatives of the political Islam who come to power, they're very conscious, I think, and of the fact that they are going to be watched, and that whatever they do may have repercussions. It's not so much that they're not so much afraid, I think, about what Europe will say or will think, but it's about their own population. Because in a place like Tunisia, for instance, or Algeria, after so many years of secularism, you cannot from one day to another, and I don't think you can ever, you know, come back to some rules of behavior of women, which are not even enshrined in Islam, because Islam recognizes the equality between men and women, but which are the rather, I would say, the expression of a very strong conservative societies, in which often rules or behaviors which often have nothing to do with religion, but much more with the social traditions and conservatism.
Thank you very much for your answers, and I hope to see you next time in another ICD conference, maybe. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much. Thank you.